South Africa hosts the G20 summit this week, the first ever on African soil, but notably without the United States. At home, debate is still ongoing over the role of Afrikaner groups, AfriForum and Solidarity, in shaping the Trump administration's rhetoric on Afrikaners. Well, has that influence now been pushed to the back burner with Trump absent from the summit? To unpack these dynamics and many other questions, like the Madlanga Commission, efforts to unseat Cyril Ramaphosa as leader of the ANC, we're joined by Professor Theo Venter from Northwest University in South Africa. Hi Theo, thanks again for joining us.
Hi Lyndon.
Well, Theo, can we start with AfriSol, as we call them now, the AfriForum and Solidarity? Have they lit a fire they can't control? Because, you hear these reports that they're trying to pull Trump back on his rhetoric about white Afrikaners. Or is this a blaze they started that they just can't control?
I spoke the other day with a very influential member of that group. I had a call. And we spoke at length because at one point I was his teacher in political science. And obviously the debate went to the linkages with the Trump administration and the local fights and groups established like Not In My Name and these kind of things. And I said to him, now, how do you deal with this problem? So his response to me was shocking. He said to me, you know what, the local problem we can manage. We can manage the billboards that people are taking off, and new ones we're putting on, and all kinds of things. What we cannot manage is Trump. I said, whoa, you're confusing me now. You started the debate, you went there several times. Now you're telling me he's unmanageable. And he said to me, yes, we've tried 3 or 4 times, different avenues, different back doors, different front doors. We tried to convince the president, this is now Trump, that there is no such a thing as white genocide. But he has now latched onto it at an emotional level, and he's using it all over the place. So they are actually having a difficulty sorting it out, because this is exactly Donald Trump. Even yesterday, I think, when he had a discussion with the Saudi prince that visited, he had a question on South Africa with the flight of Jewish or Palestinian refugees. He converted that question, he turned it around, and he said, well, I'm not going to the G20. I'm not going there because the South African government is genocidal. In other words, he now keeps on with this story. And it seems to me, in that very confidential and private discussion I had, that even Trump is not even listening to his own intelligence reports. He's not even listening to what people are telling him. Sir, there's no such a thing as genocide, and people are flirting around with this term genocide. I mean, for us living on the African continent, if you want to know what a genocide is, you go to Rwanda. If you want to know what a genocide is, you go to Namibia under the Germans in just after the turn of the century, 1908, and you actually count the bones, if I can be as brutal as that. That's genocide. Or you go to South Sudan, that's genocide. The other things which people are now trying to broaden the debate or broaden the discussion, saying, okay, if they make it impossible for you to do your work, it's a kind of genocide. Almost like you're making it impossible for somebody to work and then they resign out of own volition. Something like that. But I think the genocide story has run out of control, and it is very difficult to bring it into control, and definitely not in the Trump world. I think the only antidote for white genocide is probably Epstein files, and that thing will still develop. But that is, again, a domestic American problem which they will have to sort out, because they have a very similar kind of challenge like we have, and that is, when these things happen, you are looking forward, you're looking about what are the big things coming. For America, it's an election exactly a year from now, the midterm elections. For us, it's an election exactly a year from now, local government elections, where everybody feels that the trajectory of the ANC going down is a permanent kind of trajectory, very difficult to predict, but that's how, and that's why politicians are arguing so vehemently about where they're going. And there's not a better example than in the forefront of the evening before the G20. The ANC had an NEC meeting over the weekend where Cyril Ramaphosa actually challenged his opponents, and he challenged them by saying, if you want me to resign, give me the date. Now, that is a challenge in political terms. If you really want, the NEC is like the caucus of the ANC. It's 100, maybe 110 people representing the ANC between conferences. That's the key decision maker. And that story that broke over the weekend, that Cyril is challenging his opponents, is telling a story about where the ANC is going. The G20 is now in between, but the big story is really, where's the ANC going?
Okay, can I just quickly come back to this ex-student of yours? I assume you can't reveal his name. Well, if they say they are now telling the Trump administration there's no white genocide, but they're putting billboards also over South Africa reading, "Welcome to South Africa, the most race-regulated country in the world," which you see everywhere with the many G20 posters literally on every pole. Can they be taken seriously that they're trying to pull this back?
I think one must look at what they're saying with merit. I know there's a very strong emotional sense that to either deny or what. But it is true that when South Africa entered the democratic project in 1994, the expectation was that we will have less, let's call it institutionalized race-related legislation. That was the key determinant of apartheid in the old days. Everything was determined according to legislation, your race, your restaurants, the toilets you had to go, the beaches you had to go, everything. Well, the ANC ANC government after 1994 stopped most of those obvious things, but they converted that legislation into less obvious legislation such as BEE, Black Economic Empowerment. When can you trade? With whom can you trade? That's why we don't have Elon Musk in South Africa with Starlink. It's due to very strict legislation about, let's call it the restructuring of the economy, the restructuring of society. Now, it's not new. It's not as if we are breaking new ground in South Africa doing that. You only have to go to Malaysia and go back to see what Malaysia did vis-a-vis the Chinese, and why we have Singapore today as a independent state, not part of Malaysia, because there was a huge level of discrimination between Malays and Chinese. And the reason being that the Chinese were managing the economy and the Malays felt they had no part in the economy. Now in South Africa, it's very similar, where black people feel that, okay, we now have the economy, or we now have the political sense and we don't control, but the economy is still in the hands of a small group of people. Therefore, we need legislation to change that. And I think that's the legislation that AfriForum is referring to. But I think their banners is in your face. I'm not so sure. I haven't done research on this, but there may be countries with similar kind of legislation, but they're not in the limelight. So yeah, they're making a point. They're saying something, and I think they're frustrating government to a large extent by what they're doing. What they have created, however, and I must give them some credence for that, and that is, in a way, somebody said race is very much like sex. Everybody knows about it, but nobody talks about it. What they have created in South Africa over the last few months is there's a debate about race now. There is a debate about the situation where people are trying to define it, they're trying to put themselves into certain boxes, in or out, and it's out of that I think this group of Afrikaners came forward saying, not in my name, nie in my naam nie, where they're saying, sorry, Mr. Buys, sorry, Dr. Herman, you are doing all of these things in America and you projecting yourselves as representing the Afrikaner. And we are saying, you're not representing us. You're not doing that in the general interest. You're doing that in a very, very particular kind of small interest, and we are not sharing in that. So there's a huge debate going on, especially on social media. And interestingly enough, the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana, when he presented the mini budget last week, medium-term budget policy statement, I think is the official name, he had a paragraph about this thing, not in my name, in his speech, and he gave some credit to these guys pushing back against AfriForum and Solidarity.
It's interesting that some analysts in South Africa are saying that Trump's absence from the G20 is seen by some commentators as a blessing in disguise because, the spotlight is that not then just on him. Could the same be said of AfriForum and Solidarity, that their absence pushes their agenda a little bit further down the priority list?
Let me put it this way. The G20 is a government-to-government kind of alliance, similar to BRICS. And I don't see what AfriForum is doing or AfriSol is doing different from, do you remember 10, 15 years ago when the G7 or the G8 at one point, and again G7, when they met, there were huge riots in terms of anti-globalization, anti-climate and these things, so that it actually became very difficult to have these meetings in different parts of the world. So, yeah. What AfriForum is doing, I put in that same category. When these government-to-government meetings take place, BRICS is an example, G20 is an example, you must expect some local interest groups. And that's what AfriForum is. It's a local interest group that converts interest into pressure. The moment you put up banners and you put up all things that's in your face, that becomes pressure. And people respond to it. Currently, the government is responding to it negatively. They're not responding positively. They're not inviting them, let's say, to the union buildings to say, guys, let's talk. They're actually doing the opposite. And I think the response to them can be a little bit more nuanced, but it's currently not happening.
Can I come back to what you said about Cyril Ramaphosa, that challenge to the NEC? So, why did he say that? Who is challenging him? Could it be, the Mashatile camp?
Yeah, let's just put that in context. In December, 16th of December, the ANC is having their second most important meeting. It's called an annual general council. It's a consultative meeting and very limited decision-making powers, and it was designed to meet halfway between one conference and the next. In other words, 5 years apart, in the middle, there's a meeting called the NGC, National General Council, and what they do, they evaluate the top 7, or the so-called officials of the ANC, and they ask them, have you done your work? Have you done and have you given execution to the mandate that we gave you in the previous meeting? Now, here's the difficult part. When the ANC had their previous conference, where Ramaphosa was re-elected as president, there was no hint of a government of national unity. There was not even a chance that the ANC would share power with 9 other political parties. 1 year into the election, that happened. So now we will have a very interesting NGC coming in December, where they will not be measured in terms of what was originally said to them in 2022, they will be measured in terms of the last 16 months of the GNU. It's going to be very difficult. And I think that that conflict that's emerging in the ANC, because it's also part of the ANC preparing themselves not only for next year's elections, but the year after that, 2027, we will have a leadership election, a national conference. And I think what we've seen in history is that the NGC is kind of the starting point of the next leadership election. It is at this NGC, if I can remind you, that Jacob Zuma, after he got fired by Mbeki, came back through the back door and eventually took over the ANC. So the NGC is a very important meeting politically and in terms of the political dynamics within the ANC. So what Ramaphosa did, there was rumors in one of the Sunday newspapers that there's a chance that Cyril Ramaphosa is going to resign after the G20. You want to see through the G20 and then he's going to resign. The meaning is, or the obvious purpose of that article was to say that he's not really looking forward to an NGC where he will have to report back. And there may be questions on Pala Pala, and there can be questions on this and that and the other. And I think that came to a point in the NEC this weekend where Ramaphosa challenged his opponents saying, okay, guys, if you are gossiping behind my back, if you are spreading rumors that I'm leaving, I'm not going to leave. And if you want me to leave, give me a date. So it was really a challenge. And at this point, I think it's very important to take stock at what's happening. If we look at Thabo Mbeki, let's leave Mandela out. That was a one-term president and he had more myth about him as anything else. But what we can say about Thabo Mbeki, he was good in governance, but he was notoriously bad in managing the party. That's why he got kicked out, because people in the ANC said he's aloof. That's the word they used. He doesn't care about the party as such. He only cares about governing. Then Zuma took over. Zuma was the flip side. Zuma was politically smart. He did some interesting things in the party, but he was horrible at governing. So it was just the other way around. I mean, we're currently in trouble economically and otherwise due to what Jacob Zuma did in the 9-10 years that he was running the country. And now suddenly we've got Ramaphosa that's doing kind of both of these things. He's managing the party by challenging them, saying, okay, I'm here, challenge me. And he's doing better at governance than any one of the two. So I think he's slowly but surely getting a little bit of stature, because in the last year or so, me included, we were not very impressed with what he did as a statesman and what, because he obviously showed that he's a far better diplomat than a hard-nosed politician. But he showed this weekend, I can be a hard-nosed politician as well. The reason why I stopped here and why I expanded, because the challenge for the ANC and the government of national unity is what's going to happen after 2027 when the ANC now has elected a new leader. And according to the ANC, the leader of the ANC must also be the president of the country. That's a kind of a gentleman's agreement within the ANC. If somebody different from Paul Mashatile takes over the presidency of the party, and there's several names coming up like Toko Didiza and Nsebezi Jonas, people like that are now being floated. They may say, Mr. President, you know what? You started this GNU. You're doing so well. Why don't you stay on for the next 15 months? And then you retire at the end of your formal term as head of state. And that's a scenario I'm sketching. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's possible for the first time that we can even start speculating that is possible. Because previously, one would have said the question is not when Ramaphosa is going, but how soon after December 2027 will he be kicked out?
Well, we can't have you in the studio without talking about the Madlanga Commission. And there was an interesting spy who just popped up. So what did you think of that?
Yeah, his name is Brown Mogotsi, and he's from this province where I'm talking to you, and he has now spoken to the Madlanga Commission, but it was clear from the beginning that this is full of lies, innuendos, all kinds of speculative things. He made himself, he nominated himself as a kind of a spy for crime intelligence. He knew of everything that's going to happen, and he himself informed the minister from time to time about important developments. And he had a very interesting question from the commissioners of the Madlanga Commission, where they asked him, but why was it necessary for you to inform the minister? He has a whole police force. He has a whole intelligence community. They should inform him on a daily basis or on a 24-hour basis. What is it that I think this guy came in to confuse the whole situation, but I think he had to suffer through several questions. And at one point, the guy that's leading the commission, Chaskelson, son of old Judge Chaskelson, said to him, I'm putting it to you, Mr. Mkhotsi, you are lying to us. You're just lying. It's one of these things. It's just fascinating that somebody like that has got the audacity to say these things. The bad news is that if it is true what he's saying, the level of intelligence and the level of analysis that the police are working with is horribly low and very, very worrisome. And I think part of what Mogotsi showed us, there's a huge problem in crime intelligence. Although he had his version, I think Merida Haas at the ad hoc commission had a much harder time in Parliament yesterday. There's a certain decorum in Parliament, the way you do things, and Merida Haas just, I think she re-engineered the whole system. But I think eventually, when you do that in Parliament, I don't think people take you seriously. And Merida Haas is a well-established commentator on crime and violence in KwaZulu-Natal, and it will be a pity if people don't take her serious.
Well, a lot to unpack. The AfriSol that seems to have saddled a tiger they can't control. We're watching Ramaphosa, who you say seems to be now on the front foot, not the back foot, and of course always the Madlanga Commission. So thank you so much. Is there anything else you wanted to add at the end?
Maybe just the last thing, and that is usually when the G20 ends, there's a major declaration. Now we've got a G15, G18, because Xi Jinping isn't here, Donald Trump isn't here, the leader of Mexico isn't here. She's having her own domestic problems, and we are still expecting one or two leaders not to turn up. The question is how significant and how comprehensive will the final declaration be? It seems to me Europe has committed itself to the G20, including the UK, and I think they will work up a kind of a coalition with the South African government and the other nations to get something of that nature going. But with Donald Trump not here, Xi Jinping not here, I think the shine is a little bit off our G20.
Professor Theo Venter, thank you so much.
My pleasure, like always.